This week on the WriterCon podcast,
I would say understand if you are a process person or a results person in your writing.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Rene Gutteridge, best-selling author of over 30 novels and screenplays.
Thank you, Jesse Ulrich. And hello, writers. And hey, shout out to my co-host, Rene, too. Rene, how's everything going?
Everything is going great.
You know, this is our first episode for the new year. So it seems maybe like it would be appropriate to reflect profoundly on the year that's just passed. And then, you know, after that, we can get ready to attack the year to come. What do you think?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I'll talk more slow. No, I'm kidding. I should have. Okay. So, what do you think was the most significant event of 2022 for writers? It's Final Jeopardy time.
Yeah, you know.
We covered like a million of them. So.
We did. I mean, I can't really speak to this except for emotionally. So I'd say Colleen Hoover. That phenomenon I loved, and it sticks with me, and I don't care about the business stuff, so I will say Colleen Hoover. That's my final answer.
What part of it sticks with you, though, if not the business part? What part?
Well, I love the idea that, you know, a fairly unknown writer or, you know, whatever can be launched by social media readers. You know, I think that's super cool and fun, and I think it should give all writers hope everywhere that word of mouth is still happening.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, now taking it down, or taking it sideways, we'll say. What was the most important event of 2022 for you, for Rene?
Oh, gosh. Well, in the writing world, I guess God, this year has been a blur. Did
family camp busy?
Yeah, it's a blur to me.
Yeah, family camp was 2022, wasn't it?
Was it 2022? I feel like that's
if we're off, not by much. So
not by much. That was big, and that has produced some great opportunities. And I'm still writing movies and books and things, so I'm still getting to write, and that's always a big event for me.
Editor's note, Family Camp came out May 13th, 2022.
Oh, thank goodness.
There you go.
I'm glad that I have my years right. That would be really embarrassing. I was pretty sure, and then I was like, man, I don't know. But yeah, that sounds right. So that would be my big event, I guess.
I am certain if somebody made a movie on a script I wrote, I would know when that thing came out. That would be etched in my brain. But
I know it's been a little bit of a long year for me, but that was a fun time.
Jesse, how about you? Most important event of the year past?
I mean, I guess I bought my first house in May, same month as the Family Camp came out. So that was a big month for all of us.
Yay.
And you remember it.
I do remember. So, yeah. So buying a house, which was stressful. And now I just spent all my time thinking about things I have not yet done to said house. So.
Welcome to the next 20 years.
Yeah. I'm like, home ownership. It's great.
It's the dream. All right, guys. Well, our interview guest today is Chris Jones, who is an entrepreneur who quit at the peak of his career to honor a promise he made to himself when he was 19 that he would become a writer one day. Chris now spends his time between Tarrytown, New York and Barbados, where he finds time to swim with turtles and observe cloud animals. And oh yes, he's written his first novel, which is called Headcase, which, among other things, he describes as the best therapy he's ever had. We're going to talk to him all about that and Barbados and much more. But first, the news. All right, we're going to blast through 3 stories. I picked all 3 of these, though, because I think they all kind of relate to this wrapping up of the where are we now, what's happened in the year that's passed, both for traditional publishing and, of course, the whole independent and small and self-publishing world. News story number 1. Written Word Media releases their report, their annual report, which, among other things, deals with author earnings. We've talked about this report before. It's one of the most reliable out there because they have actual authors who respond anonymously, but broken down by how much money they're earning. And so you can see interesting things. And I think it's the most accurate information we have right now about author earnings. So that's always fun. So here's what I'm going to point a finger at, because I know some people hear us talking about marketing and think, ugh, I don't want to do that. What a drag. I want to be a writer. I want to write. And so, according to the Written Word Media report, do most successful independent or self-publishing authors market? Yes, they certainly do. But they may not like it any more than you think you would. It's clearly, thinking that it's a big drag is not unusual. But many people call it the most challenging part of the process. But it's got to be done. And what people do, I've noticed, varies too, depending upon how successful people are. And so how much are they putting back in advertising? There seem to be some, consistent strains, Amazon ads, Facebook ads, but the overwhelming theme I got from this was, yeah, you've got to do it, but it does not have to take over your whole writing career or your whole writing day. I don't know, Rene, what takeaways did you see in all this?
Okay, like I actually went to read this article, Bill, and you should be proud of me. That was a long article, and I will admit that at the end I skimmed, but they did have some great bullet points you could just
You're
go
allowed. Well,
It
that's
was
what
a long
bullets
article,
are for.
but but I thought it was interesting. I think the more you earn, the more help you can afford. And that makes a big difference in what kind of time you're spending. When you're doing all of the jobs, it takes more time, but that's expected when you begin. And that's just kind of how you have to earn your way in, I think. So if I were one of those top spots, I would definitely use some of my income to get help and not have to do part of it. But at the end of the day, it's your face, it's your voice, and you're still going to have to make appearances and do the legwork. So,
well, and they're still doing it or getting it done, whatever marketing you're talking about, one way or the other.
Yep.
May change your options, but not what you're getting done. All right, move on. Second news story. Here we're going to flip to what some people are acting like is a startling revelation that, according to at least some sources, publishers are actually paying to get on bookstore bestseller lists. Horrors. Just to be clear what we're talking about, we're like you're walking into the front of your chain bookstore and it says bestseller list. It doesn't say New York Times. It certainly doesn't say Amazon. It just bestsellers. And here's 1, 2, 3. And as it turns out, according to this interview from a former W.H. Smith employee, that's a very popular chain in Canada and the United Kingdom. That chart position is not based on any kind of sales. It's just based on how much a publisher has paid to have its title billed as a bestseller. I mean, do you even get to pick your number? Do you get to pay more for the lower numbers? I'm envisioning this clerk who's just kind of pulling stuff out of a box and not realizing that he's giving away really valuable property. I don't know. Jesse, does this shock and surprise you?
No, I thought we all knew this. Like, don't. I mean, there was lots of articles about sort of the publishing wing of the sort of more right politically groups and how they would, like, beforehand, use pre-orders as a way to get on bestseller lists before the books even came out. And it was a lot of just like large organizations with large pockets buying a lot of copies of the book ahead of time. And so, like, people have always been gaming the system. So at least if you're going to pay for your book to be considered a bestseller, like make sure it's number one on said fake list that they're making. So what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me. All right, third news story back in the world of traditional publishing, and this comes from the end of the year report. It's a blog, really, from Kristen Nelson. She's done this for many years, although she says this is going to be the last. We'll see. I hope not. It's always interesting. Anyway, so here we have someone at one of the top literary agencies, getting the queries, taking on the new clients, selling books and all that kind of stuff. And she publishes a very detailed report so that you can kind of see, at least from their perspective, what's going on. Here's, of course, the part that caught my eye that I clicked out of a much longer report. I'll put the link in the show notes. But she's got a list of numbers. 8,539. That's the number of queries read and responded to, which was actually down quite a bit from the previous year. All right, next number, 4. That's the number of new clients who signed with the Nelson Literary Agency. And actually, none of those came from Kristen herself because she's apparently not been open to new clients for a while. They come from her partner, Joanna. So just to run this by you again, number of queries responded to, over 8,500. Number of new clients signed, 4. And there's no line about how many books sold, so make what you will of that. Rene, is it even possible to get an agent anymore?
Okay, here's what I'll say about this.
Okay.
Of the 8,539, my guess is 8,000 of those should never have been sent in.
Well,
so you've got maybe 500 you're competing with. If you're sending to, a lot of people send into the top agents, forgetting that there's a lot of agents out there brand new or starting their own whatever. So, my advice to people is like, find the hungry agent, find the agent that wants clients. My agent, when I got my agent, she had just started her agency, and now she's one of the top, if not the top agencies in my market. She built her career over the time I was building my writing career. So it's great now to be with that agency. So, I think if you want the very, very best, you may have trouble getting in. If you're willing to start with somebody who's starting too, that may be where you have your luck, because they're hungry and they need to sell books.
Or in my case, I started with someone who'd already retired, but the point was the same. She wasn't buried in work at that point in time. So perfect.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to our interview guest. As I said before, today we're talking to Chris K. Jones, who calls himself a recovering serial entrepreneur and has now written his first ever novel, which is called Headcase. And he's speaking to us from Barbados, so we better not hold him up. Jesse, cue up the music. Let's get crack-a-lackin'. Hey, Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, well, we have a traditional first question to spring on our guests, and that is, if you could give all the writers, aspiring writers, published writers, everybody listening to this podcast, one piece of advice, what would it be?
I would say understand if you are a process person or a results person in your writing. So my background, I'm a former CFO. I'm a very former athlete. I'm a very results-oriented person. So then what I have to do is now work on process. So whatever you are, you work on the opposite. So for me, it's really easy to create a spreadsheet with all timelines and how many hours and pages and numbers and things like that. But I have to get away from that and be able to just sit and process and allow things to come and not constantly have, what I call my inner CFO chirping at me about how many words and things I got done. And if you are a real big process person, then you might want to have set goals for words and pages and minutes. I kept a timesheet. because I wanted to know how long it took. And so it took me 714 and a half hours to write Headcase.
Oh my goodness.
And because I wanted to know how long, and I was able to be able to do that. So if you're a real process person, work on your results and setting metrics. And if you're a results person like me, you have to slow down, shut off the chirping, shut off the numbers, and just really sit, focus, and struggle within process.
You know, my entire career, I've had people asking me, how long does it take to write a novel? And I always say, I don't know. But this man knows. I'm just going to use your answer from now on.
714 and a half. So keep the half in there.
All right, so let's get to it. See if we can anger as many people as possible. How's life in Barbados?
Yeah, it's beautiful down here. It's really a great place. I mean, I knew I was living the writer's dream, getting up each day and living on the beach. And like I said, I did real well and sold a company so I could focus on my writing. But it was also motivating to be able to get up and know that, like, hey, I'm living this dream. I better get to work because this better be a good book, because people would give their right arm to have what I'm doing. So it kept me accountable to myself, knowing everyone would die to be able to do this. So I have to do, because we all think about someday to write that book on the beach. Well, I'm able to do it. So go write a good book. So I worked real hard at it. You know, I worked real hard and to make sure that it was the best possible thing, and working with my editors. So that was the motivation too. And yeah, it's real nice to be able to look here, but you have to still write a good book, tell a good story, and be entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so most writers are traditionally introverts, not all. You came from a different world that you may not have been an introvert, or you were at least forced into being an extrovert. And now you're in Barbados. What is happening there? Are you by yourself on the ocean? Are you amongst people? What is happening there?
Yeah, so I mean, two things, right? So even when I am extrovert, and I didn't really realize it, I think COVID really, because I was always so busy, I built companies, and when I went home, I just wanted to be alone with my writing. And, you know, I'd CFO during the day and writer at night. But what I found after, you know, really being, even down here, we were in pretty strict lockdown from January 21 till April, where, you know, I couldn't leave the house except from 6 to 9 in the morning to use and even after that, even though the beach is right in front of me, I couldn't use it. So it was good to get a lot of work done. I mean, I was able to get a lot of writing done, but yeah, I was very isolated. So I say that I'm, you know, an extrovert in the world's loneliest profession, because you do get very kind of, you know, for me at least, I like being around people and I enjoy it. So yeah, like my best friend's down with me now. So yeah, it's and people come down to visit me, and it's been great. And then, you know, I've been going back and forth from New York to here. But I think definitely understanding whether you're the introvert or extrovert. So for me, writing has been a real big different shift of like sometimes having to go outside and like, all right, I need to see a real human being, because I've been talking to 30 people in my head for the last, you know, 10 hours. And like, I need to see a real human being right now. So that was interesting. I think it's very important. Like, but I mean, I know a lot of writers are introverted. My cousin's a really good writer and she's introverted, but I enjoy going out and meeting other writers. I enjoy talking about writing and everything else. And so for me, I enjoy doing the readings. Like the readings are a lot of fun, and Q&A. I love that. It's to me, that's just that's great time for me.
That's awesome.
Well, then tell us more about this book you've created, Headcase.
Yep, Headcase follows the story of Dr. Andrew Beck, who's the go-to sports psychologist for troubled athletes. And there isn't a head he can't fix except his own. And when his own childhood traumas and demons get the best of him, he makes a wager using his inside access to athletes. And it all goes, you know, sour. It leads him down this dark path of blackmail, a mysterious murder, and life or death bluffing. And his only way out is to go all in.
Okay, so that sounds amazing. And it's based on parts of your life, parts of what you
No,
know, anything you
parts
made
of what I
the
know.
okay,
Yeah,
okay, tell us about that.
yeah. So I was a competitive athlete. I was a wrestler in college, and then after that, I competed in judo. Trained with Olympic teams as a throw dummy, for the women. But I was able to train with Olympians. I spent a lot of time with pro athletes when I was young, and it's always been something I researched. So the concept was I always, like to know how elite athletes handle failure. And for me, that was always, I would always beat myself up after a match and then replay and watch film over and over again to make sure I didn't lose the next time. So I always wondered, okay, what do elite athletes do when they have really just a meltdown? I was like, well, they get a sports psychologist. They talk to them. I said, well, what if, the favorite question for a writer, what if that sports psychologist had more issues than the people he was treating? And that started it. And
Sure.
and I created my own world. I didn't want to use professional teams, so I made up all my own teams, and I made up all my own leagues and places, and built stadiums that don't exist, like one on the west side of New York. And that was fun. That was really a lot of fun, building my own little world. And then even like where he gambles is in this place called the Five Iron, which is down on Mercer Street. And when I was doing my research, like all we had was Google Maps, and Google Maps is amazing. So I'm going down streets in New York, like, where can I put this gambling den? And I see on Mercer Street, one of my favorite streets, it's still got the cobblestone. I see an elevator at the street level with a camera. I'm like, that's it. That's it. That's the place. So that's where it was.
That's great. Writers, I don't think utilize Google Maps enough, or it's a really very wonderful tool that we didn't used to have. It wasn't around when I started writing, so I could only write about places that I either was willing to travel to, or somebody had been to, I could research or something. So that's a good point.
Yeah, Google Maps is fantastic for your research. Wikipedia. That was really what was really amazing. I could find anything. The amount of things I Googled and found were just unbelievable. And honestly, for the writers out there, there's no excuse for bad research with all the tools that you have at your fingertips. And for me, it's interesting. I really despise research in all areas of my life, and I have lots of funny stories where things I didn't research, like trips and things. But when I'm researching character and making things authentic, I can spend hours and hours. So it's the only part of my life where I research stuff.
So when you're researching, is that what kind of led you down the dark side of this profession, or was it just the character that you came up with?
Just the character I came up with, because I was like, okay, he's a real damaged person. He's the son of a Masters golf champion, and he was a prodigy, a child prodigy. And so his father had the idea that they were going to be the first father and son Masters champions. But he drove him so hard to the point where he hated playing golf. And at 18, when he was a top-ranked amateur, he walked away from the game, and the relationship never healed. And his father was his childhood trauma, because his father, who left him at the country club, at Greenwich Country Club, all day long because he was an industrialist, and his mother had died. And, what else are you going to do? You're going to learn to play golf. And he thought golf was a sport for playboys and, drunkards and things like that. And so now he wants to show his dad what a real father and son relationship is, but he was just so abusive. And teaching him and he taught Andrew how to get in people's heads. And again, that part of it.
Yeah.
And the things he learned about that. So where his gambling comes through is, even though he walked away from golf, he loved competition. And he plays poker, and by playing poker, he can use everything he knows as a psychologist to get in his opponent's head and master them. So it's not even so much about the money and winning. It's more about, can I master this person to the point where I can predict what cards they have based on them? And that's what he gets and that's what gets him into trouble too.
That sounds like a super fascinating, multi-layered kind of character that we all really strive to write. So good
And
job.
super dark too.
Well,
Yeah.
that creates conflict, right, Chris? Like the darker you
I
go.
just wonder, what were your sports experiences like, Chris? Is
Pretty
this your
traumatic.
first book?
Yeah, pretty traumatic. From wrestling, I developed eating disorders.
Really?
Lots of broken bones, and my own mental health was definitely affected. Where I was battling the scale instead of my opponent, and starved myself, and like I said, developed eating disorders, and really did a lot of damage to my body. A good thing, and it was actually my Buddhist teacher who recommended I take judo, and I believe everything in life is reincarnation and get a chance to do things over. So I got to do that over again, and I did really well. I never cut weight. I was in good conditioning, and I approached the sport with a much more healthier mind state. I really didn't get nervous. I had my work and everything else. So it wasn't like the big thing, like when high school and college, where everything you're doing, your whole persona is wrapped around on the field. And that's a lot with a lot of athletes. They only feel safe when they're on the field, on the ice, on the court, and they don't know who they are outside of their sport. So one of the things I also try to do is I am trying to raise awareness towards mental health in sports. And we're seeing a lot of it right now, which is great, as athletes are coming forward and talking about their mental health. During my research, I found out that the level of anxiety levels that professional basketball players are under is at the same level as men and women on the front lines. So it's a lot. And I think a lot of them had horrific childhoods, and there's not one thing, any of my research or interviews or people I talk to, none of that's in the book. Those conversations are sacred, and I will never reveal anything. And there's enough problems in the world where you can figure it out. That wasn't hard. Coming up with athletes with issues and people with their traumas, that wasn't hard to do. That was fun. And then we're informed by our trauma, right? And our characters make choices based on that trauma and where it leads them. And Andrew makes a ton of bad choices. So that's where.
Well, we always say in writing, the more bad choices your character makes, the better the novel is going to be. So
what else are you going to write about? Did you plan those all out in advance? Were you, how detailed was the outlining here?
Well, it's a great question. So it originally started out as a TV pilot, and I started writing it as a TV pilot, and I won some contests and things like that. But then as we went into the pandemic, it really wasn't able to make much traction. So I was talking to someone in the business, and I said, maybe I should just turn it into a novel. And she said, that's a good idea. So I just took it. So I had a basis to work from, but it's very different. Really, there's a certain point I just threw it all out, but I had a starting point. And I guess when it comes to, and I just found this out too, like people, they say there's planner and pantsers, right?
Right.
I'd say I'm in the middle. I'm a plantser. So I like an outline, but I still leave a lot of room open for the conversation, for the characters. And one of the things I learned from Neil Gaiman is he said, be quiet and let your characters talk to you. And I learned so much about my characters. I just said, all right, talk to me. Tell me what you want. Tell me what's going on in your life. Tell me about your childhood. And things that, even though I've been working on this for a while, I didn't know that. I didn't know one of my characters was lactose intolerant. And I know it's coming from my brain, right? I understand it's coming from my brain. But if we allow ourselves the open-mindedness to let things come, then you can really develop your own character. So I've done interviews with characters. I just ask them questions and they answer me, or I answer me. But it's really very interesting. I think that's a process. If you get stuck with something or you need a little bit of backstory, ask them and see what comes. It's a really fun exercise. It was very fun.
Well, you have to have fun with your characters and make them three-dimensional, leave a footprint in the grass type character. So I love your process. It's fascinating to hear how you build, your character and what part of the process comes along for you. So, okay, so here's a question. Is this a career for you now? Or is it just kind of a bucket list thing?
No, this was something I've always wanted to do. I started writing in high school, and I dedicated my book to my creative writing teacher,
That's
Paul
sweet.
Butanek. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was great. I got to take him to, when I did the reading in my hometown, I got to bring him, and so that was great.
Awesome.
Yeah, he's the one who inspired me. He believed in me, and when I went to college, but I had this, I have both sides of my brain. I'm very analytical, but very creative. And I have a lot of neuroplasticity between both sides. And it was a hard choice, but I, went for accounting. And when I was studying, but I took creative writing classes whenever I could. And my sophomore English professor said, Chris, you're really talented. You should pursue your writing. You should switch. I said, look, I grew up poor. I don't want to be a poor, starving artist. So I'm going to go out, I'll make money, and then I'll write.
That was a good plan, Chris.
That's what I did.
A lot of foresight.
Yeah. It took me a lot longer, than I wanted to, but I started really going back and making it serious around 2014. I wrote a play called Twisted Metal about two Marines and their PTSD that was just read, locally at my local theater group. And then the idea for Headcase came and worked on that. So it's really, it is my career right now. This is what I spend my time on. I still have, other companies that, I invest in and things like that. But for the most part, I get to do this, which is a luxury. And I understand it is. And it's not an easy business. I mean, the writing is hard enough, but the book marketing is also incredibly tough.
How hard has that been, though, transitioning from, the business world, the serious suits, and the creative world, which, for better or worse, I'm guessing is very different?
Yeah, it is very different. And I have definitely the war that goes on inside between my creative consciousness and my money mindset. The CFO is constantly chirping about things and this and that. When are you going to make money? And I have to tell them, be quiet. You had 30 years. Now it's the artist is in charge. But sometimes it's hard. It's hard. Like, I'll start thinking about planning, and I'll start, writing out my spreadsheets of how much time, and I have to stop. And this time as I'm working on the second book in this series, it's really all about, all right, just enjoy the process and really take the time. But it was harder than I thought. The thing is, having COVID and having everything shut down, then you had loads of time of sitting there and writing, and so that made it a little bit easier, but it was definitely, it was a challenge.
So I think writers are always interested to see what other writers' days look like. How do you start your day? What does it look
Especially
like?
his.
Yeah, right. Well, you don't have to mention the ocean gazing, but other than that, I mean, actually, do you sit by the ocean and write? I mean, what does that look like? What's your beverage of choice? What does it look like?
Yeah, so wake up, first thing is a morning meditation to set my day and my intentions for the day. I'll usually plan out what I'm going to do that day, then exercise, ideally, and then sit down and get my writing done. If I'm down here, then it's great. I can take a break and go sit outside. I'll go for a swim. Usually after the workout, that's the reward. After workout, I can jump in the ocean. And then, but at home, when I can't do that, it's just, get back and sit down and get right at it. And I clock in. I do keep a timesheet. I keep that's important for me. So that keeps that also keeping the timesheet was also the one metric that kept, my money mindset, my inner CFO kept him quiet, and it allowed that here's your metric. Now be quiet. Now I can just focus and live in my world. And I find that I really need to immerse myself. Like I can't do, a half an hour here, a half an hour there. I need a couple of hours of quiet time. And the other interesting thing is like, I know I could work in a spreadsheet 10, 12 hours. You can force it. You can force yourself and you can muscle, a spreadsheet and that type of work. You can't do that with manuscripts. I did it a couple times. And I looked at it, I'm like, oh my God, that was trash. And it was where you really have to be in that mindset. And I get 4 or 5 really good hours of creative work. And then after that, there's diminishing returns. Every once in a while, you can have that night where you're really 8-9 hours that you're just cranking, but those are few and far between. So keeping track. And then when I'm done, I'm done. And then do some more research, read, definitely writers got to be readers, and going through, like I read like a lot of David Baldacci's novels, John Grisham novels, because they write thrillers. So I wanted to make sure, and I read, honestly, I went out and I read their first books because I wanted to compare myself. I'm like, okay, how good is my first book versus their first book? Just
interesting. I've never heard of that before. That's a good idea.
Yeah, because I want to see where I'm at. I know I'll get better, and I'm very proud. It's won a couple awards it won an award from Reader's Favorite, Literary Titans, New England Writers Festival, American Writers Awards. So it's done well, and I'm proud of it. And I think, but that I also want to know I'll get better, And I had 2 editors that really helped me, and that's another thing I can do. I can have editors to work with, and I learned a lot from my editors. I learned so much. From Ben Obler, handled the more on the developmental editing, and a friend of mine down here, Jill Tomlin, she handled my more of the line editing. I call her, Jill, the grammarian. So she's, because I didn't really have to worry about grammar so much as a CFO. Well, I have to do it now. So getting skills, So this year, my whole goal is improve my craft. Just get much better at craft.
So on that point, Headcase is done. What's next?
Book 2. So the first one is book 1, Shock and Denial. Second one is, and it's interesting because a lot of the people who read it, they're like, are you done with the second one? I'm like, no. You're like, oh, because I kind of leave it on a cliffhanger. I resolve some of the things, but there's definitely some open things that people are like, are you done yet? Are you done yet? I'm like, oh boy, great. Now I just put pressure on myself. So, but it's all good.
Did you have it planned to have a second book, or did it? Yeah. Okay.
When I did it as a TV show, I plotted out 5 seasons.
Oh, gotcha.
But the timeline, I always love the shows that mess with timelines, and so things have changed, right? So you might have had that original outline, but since some big items have changed, it kind of moves everything on a completely different. Those other things don't make sense now, right? I have to make up new ones. So that was interesting. And it takes place in 1 week of his life. So this whole book is 380 pages. It's 1 week. So we just get 7 days of his life going from high flyer to he's in a lot of trouble.
Interesting. Oh, that's so
sounds fascinating. Hey, Chris, thanks so much for being on the podcast and telling us all about Headcase.
Sure. And for your listeners, they're more than welcome to go out to my website and they can download the first 7 chapters free. And also the audio book is out if they prefer audio. It was done by an actor, not by me, because there's 60 different speaking parts and I needed an actor. And you can listen to the first 5 minutes on my website, and that's chriskjones.com.
Hey, terrific interview, wasn't it? And let me just remind you that if you haven't joined the WriterCon Facebook group yet, you still can. Do it today. There'll be a link in the show notes. And for that matter, subscribe to the totally free WriterCon e-newsletter. It comes out every other week. And for more information about Rene, you can find her at renegutteridge.com on social media and as a senior contributor at Writing Momentum. Hey, until next time, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.